All right, today we're diving into something that sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right now. We're talking about a legal and technological puzzle that could literally reshape global trade as we know it.
So here's the central mystery, right? Picture a massive cargo ship, a ghost ship, basically, with no human crew, sailing the ocean guided only by an algorithm. And then bam, it collides with another vessel. There's damage, maybe even worse, but with no captain to point the finger at, who's actually responsible?
Let's make this really concrete. Imagine that autonomous ship hits a small boat with a family on it. The victims or their loved ones, they're going to want justice. They're going to want compensation. But who do they sue? The company that owns the ship? The programmer who wrote one faulty line of code? What about the manufacturer of a sensor that failed? You see, this isn't just a thought experiment. It's the nightmare scenario that is keeping maritime lawyers and insurers up at night.
Now, to understand why this is such a complete mess, we first have to look at how things have worked for, well, hundreds of years. You see, the sea has a very old, very established set of rules.
And the absolute cornerstone of that system is this principle: vicarious liability. It sounds kind of fancy, but it's a really simple concept. The person in charge, the ship owner, is on the hook for the mistakes of the people they hire. The captain is their agent, so the captain's screw-ups become the owner's problem.
The whole process is remarkably clear, just a straight line. Step 1, a human on the ship messes up. They fail in their duty of what the law calls good seamanship. Usually, this means they've broken one of the official rules of the road at sea. And step 3, the ship owner pays the price. See? It's a direct chain of responsibility, from a crew member's action straight to the owner's wallet.
For literally centuries, maritime law has been built on this one simple idea: human error. The system works because you can always find a person to blame, and that person always works for someone with deep pockets and good insurance. But what happens when you take the person out of the equation entirely?
Before we get to that, let's take a quick look at a totally different model. You know, the sea is huge and has always been pretty decentralized, but the sky, that's a whole other story. So in the United States, before 1958, the airspace was basically the Wild West. Legal documents from the time describe it as a state of untold confusion. You had the military and civilian authorities just fighting for control. Then, Congress steps in and creates the Federal Aviation Agency, the FAA. And here's the crucial part. They gave one person, a single civilian administrator, total authority over all safety rules for the sky. They centralized control.
And this just highlights how powerful that central authority really is. I mean, the FAA doesn't just write the rules, it enforces them, and it has real teeth. They actually have the power to seize an aircraft to collect fines. Now, the courts have looked very carefully at that power, but it just goes to show you a level of direct, top-down control that simply does not exist in the maritime world. So keep that model in your head.
Okay, so with that idea of centralized control from aviation fresh in our minds, let's get back to our ghost ship collision, where the old, simple rules are about to slam headfirst into a very new, very complicated reality. This is the question that just breaks everything. The entire system of vicarious liability, the whole thing, is built on a human making a mistake. So what do you do when the crew member at the helm is an algorithm? You can't exactly put a piece of software on the witness stand, can you?
The difference here is just stark. In the old world, human error happens, the ship owner gets sued. Simple. But in our new world, it's a system failure. And that list of who gets sued, it shows it's not a chain of liability anymore. It's a spider web. The ship owner is still a target, for sure, but now so is the company that built the navigation system, the person who wrote the code, the supplier of the sensors, and maybe even a remote operator sitting thousands of miles away.
And the reasons for that system failure are just as complicated. It could be a hidden defect in the hardware, a simple software bug, or a mistake by that remote operator. It could even be something malicious, like a cyber attack. And then you have the really tricky one, the black box AI. A system so complex it can't even explain its own decisions. It's like having a brilliant but silent pilot. How in the world do you assign fault for that?
This legal chaos leads us straight into the engine room of global commerce, insurance. Because think about it. If you can't figure out who to blame, you can't figure out who should pay. And if a ship can't get insured, it's not going anywhere.
So most of the world's commercial ships are insured by something called P&I clubs. These are basically mutual associations where ship owners all chip into a giant pot to cover each other's liabilities. They're both the insurers and the insured. And this system has been the bedrock of maritime trade for over 150 years.
But autonomous ships, well, they create a whole series of absolute nightmare scenarios for these clubs.
First, there's silent cyber, which refers to old insurance policies that are dangerously vague about whether cyber attacks are even covered. Then there's the truly terrifying risk of cascading losses. Just imagine one hacker breaches a single remote control center and causes an entire fleet of ships to collide at once. That's a multi-billion-dollar disaster from a single keystroke. And with no past data to look at, it's a world of unknown unknowns, making it impossible to calculate the risk.
And hey, this isn't just me speculating. This quote comes directly from someone at one of those P&I clubs talking about autonomous ships. They state, flat out, that they wouldn't expect their members to pool money to cover these new risks because, and I'm quoting here, it is difficult to formulate an approach when there is limited knowledge. What they're really saying is the risk is incalculable and, because of that, pretty much uninsurable under the current system.
So this brings us full circle, doesn't it? We've got an old legal system that's just breaking under the strain of new technology, and we have the insurance industry basically sounding the alarm. So, what's the solution? Well, even with this tangled web of liability, experts all agree that in any collision, the ship owner is still going to be the first one to get sued. They're the most obvious target. But unlike the old days, that lawsuit is just the opening bell for a long, incredibly expensive fight for the owner to try and prove the fault actually belongs to a software developer or a hardware manufacturer.
Which brings us right back to the model of the skies. Does the maritime world need its own version of the FAA? A powerful, centralized international body to set the technical standards, create new rules for robots, and basically decide who's to blame? It's a pretty radical idea for an industry that's built on tradition, and just imagine trying to get the global agreement needed for something like that. It would be a monumental task.
Look, for centuries, maritime law has evolved to support commerce. It's always followed the money. But the speed of technological change right now is just outpacing legal reform. The ghost ships are coming, there's no doubt about it. And the question of whether our old laws can adapt or whether global trade itself is going to get wrecked on the shores of innovation, well, that remains to be seen.